Welcome to the second annual Inclusion Fusion Disability Ministry Web Summit. My name is Rhett Smith, and I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you about an issue that's really important and personal to my heart. It's the issue of anxiety, or being anxiousness. And it's something that I've struggled with my whole life. In fact, as I share with you today, and as you watch and as you participate, you'll notice and you'll see that I'm still anxious, that I still wrestle with anxiety. It's something I still work through. And you may notice that I tend to stutter, or can't say a word right, or a phrase right, or may pause. And so I hope that my journey and my story helps inspire you of why we should be more inclusive and intentional in reaching out to people and ministering to people who also struggle with anxiety. But before we begin, let me just say a thank you to a couple of key sponsors. As you know, with any conference, for a conference to happen, for all the details to come together without a hitch, lots of people have to work tirelessly to make that happen. I want to thank Key Ministry and all the work they do working with children and adults who have hidden and non-hidden disabilities. Thank you, Key Ministry. I know you do wonderful work and touch lots of lives. Thank you for being a part of this. Also, Pajama Conference. Pajama Conference does an awesome job of taking this stuff and putting it online so you and I can sit behind a screen and participate. And so thank you, Pajama Conference. You can find more about their work at pajamaconference.com and more about Key Ministry's work at keyministry.org. Thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this and for working so hard to make this happen. A couple of things that are probably important for you to know about me and why I'm here to share. First of all, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, work in a private practice in Plano, Texas called Oxano Counseling. Love what I do. Love working with people at all stages of life. Work with a lot of families, work with a lot of couples, work with a lot of young adults transitioning in life, work with a lot of teens who are transitioning into college and young adulthood. And you know, with all the people I work with, anxiety is a huge issue that they bring into the door, into the counseling office. And so I'm glad to be here today to talk more about that. Also, I work at the Hideaway Experience, which is a ranch up in Amarillo, Texas. It's a 4-day marriage intensive where we bring 4 couples together and 2 therapists, and we work intently and purposefully on their marriage and really help them to walk away with a new life, with a new marriage, to walk away with a restored marriage. And you can find more about the work they do at www.intensives.com. Also, very thankful for Moody Publishers giving me the opportunity this last March, to publish the book, The Anxious Christian, Can God Use Your Anxiety for Good? And in this book, I talk about how God uses our anxiety as a catalyst to help us grow. How instead of being something bad or something that means we're a bad Christian or we don't have enough faith, that God, in fact, can use anxiety as a way to kind of wake us up and to say, hey, pay attention to it, pay attention to it. And when we pay attention to anxiety and we work through it and we face it, it's a way for us to grow closer to God. So thankful for that opportunity. And so the question we're asking this year at the conference is why? Why should we be more intentional as ministries, as churches, as people, to be inclusive to people, to be inclusive to adults and children and their families who struggle with disabilities? And the question, why, is an important question. Why should we be more inclusive of those who wrestle with anxiety, whether children or adults? How do we be more inclusive to them who are not part of the church or congregation or ministry? How do we reach out to them? And how do we be more inclusive and minister to those who are right there in our congregations, in the midst of us? How do we reach out to them? And why is it an important question? Because why should we care about anxiety? First of all, I care about it deeply. It's something that I've wrestled with my entire life. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 6 years old. And from that moment on, I struggled with the unknowns of whether or not she would die or whether she would live. And for 5 years, as she was in and out of the hospital, I struggled with that anxiety. When I was 11, she finally did pass away. And I remember 2 weeks later going to school and the teacher calling on me to read. And this once outgoing kid who could read a book and who loved reading out loud and raise his hand, I couldn't read anymore. I mean, I knew the words, but I couldn't literally get sounds out. I started to stutter. And that stuttering created anxiety and created fear. And it happened not only in school, but in the church. I remember one time a Sunday school teacher passed out a verse for me to read, but there were like 10 other kids before me who read verses, and I could feel the anxiety building and building and building as it got closer to me reading. And finally, when it came time for me to read, I couldn't read the verse. So embarrassing, so shameful. And the teacher and the Sunday school teacher didn't know what to do with my anxiety, didn't know how to help me, didn't have the tools to help. And so I want to be able to help people figure out ways that we can be more inclusive of reaching out to those who struggle with anxiety, whether they're outside the walls of the ministry of church or whether they're in our walls in the ministry of church. And you may also ask, is anxiety even that big of an issue? And so I want to talk to you about how we reframe anxiety in the church. In fact, Alan Hugh Cole Jr. in his book, awesome book, Be Not Anxious, says that in a typical congregation of 150 people, at least 20 people can be diagnosed with clinical anxiety. And that's not to mention all the number of people who wrestle with just kind of your everyday anxiety of just worries and stress and fear with relationships and parenting and jobs. And so if you imagine a congregation of several thousand people, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are wrestling with anxiety. And that's why we should care about it. And that's why we should think of ways to be more inclusive to those families, to those adults, to those children who struggle with being anxious. And so as I talk today and share with you, there's 5 takeaways we're gonna talk about, and that I hope you walk away thinking through and working towards. 1 is, what is anxiety? 2, how do we reframe anxiety? What does that look like? 3, can anxiety be a barrier but also an opportunity and a catalyst for growth? 4, what are some practical steps for ministering to people in our church or ministry who have anxiety and wrestle with that? What are some practical steps also for the church in reaching out to people who struggle and wrestle with anxiety? And so that's what we're going to look at today. And I hope you walk away with some just practical jumping off points to help people with anxiety. Well, what is anxiety? I could give you a piece of paper and you could write down a bunch of stuff about what anxiety is. And you come up with a huge list of things. In fact, you might say words like fear or worry. You might write down words like concern or stress. Or maybe you might mention phrases like fight or flight. Or anxiety conjures up danger. Or maybe for some of you, anxiety is about freedom and about choice and about possibility. And anxiety comes in because what if I make the wrong choice, right? Anxiety could look a lot of different ways. A couple different definitions that I like, and they're very similar, is 1, anxiety is a state of uneasiness and apprehension about future uncertainties. And again, anxiety is a state of apprehension resulting from the anticipation of those threatening events or situations. And so anxiety sometimes is things that I can locate. I know where my anxiety is coming from. So if I'm going to go out in a couple of days and give a talk, I'm going to be anxious. In fact, when I get anxious, I can locate my anxiety as being in the anticipation of that talk. I know where my anxiety comes from. But other times, we don't know what we're anxious about. Anxiety has more of a sense of dread, a sense of this not knowing. It's a sense about identity and about who we are. We can't locate it in anything. We don't know where it's coming from. And so anxiety is not a one-size-fits-all. It's multifaceted. And we have to kind of think broad and think all-encompassing when we talk about anxiety and what it looks like. My favorite definition of anxiety, perhaps, is anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Soren Kierkegaard says that in Genesis 2, when God commanded that they could eat of all this fruit of these trees but this one, anxiety then slipped itself into us as people, into our lives, into humanity. That their freedom to choose to obey or not obey is really the beginning, the genesis of anxiety in our lives. Also, when you think about anxiety, it could be stuff that we see, right? It could be, as I talk, you can notice that I stutter or as I get nervous. Or if you were to watch me in public or watch someone in public, you might notice that they avoid situations. And so we can see that anxiety. It's easy to see with our eyes, or not so easy. But sometimes anxiety can't be seen. It's hidden, right? It's non-hidden. Sometimes it manifests itself in our sense of identity and who we are. We ask questions like, who am I? Those are really questions that are driven by anxiety often. Or sometimes we get paralyzed by choices. And not everyone sees that. So anxiety is multifaceted. It looks different to different people. It's hidden and non-hidden. It's places we can locate, the speech I'm giving in a few days, right? Or it's things that we can't locate, the sense of dread. And so I want you to think broad about anxiety. And when it comes to our faith, what do we think about in terms of anxiety in our faith? Well, often I hear the verse Philippians 4:6. Paul says, do not be anxious. Well, people come to my office every day where someone has said to them, Paul says, do not be anxious, but they're sitting here and they're still anxious. And they're like, what do I do with this anxiety? Does that mean I'm a bad Christian? Does that mean something is wrong with me? Does that mean God is mad at me? And I have to remind people that Paul, when he writes those words, is someone who's come a long way. He's someone who's faced his fears, who's faced conflict, who's faced his anxiety. Right? He's been shipwrecked and beaten and stoned, and he's gone hungry and thirsty. He's someone in a different stage of life who's able to go through that anxiety and come out on their side and say, do not be anxious. And sometimes we're just not there, or the people that we minister to and reach out to are not in that place. And though Philippians 4:6 is truth and it's God's word and it's in the Bible, we also have to couple that with us coming alongside of them and walking through that journey. It's not enough to simply throw a verse at them. That's the easy way out. It's harder work for us to reach out and to be inclusive and to walk alongside those people. Also, anxiety is all throughout the Bible. Whether the word is specifically mentioned or we get a sense of it from the text. For example, in Genesis, going back to Genesis 2, as Soren Kierkegaard talks about and mentions, there is anxiety about choice. They now have the freedom to eat or not eat of that fruit. There's choices introduced. I'm anxious about that. Or there's relational anxiety. Genesis 32 comes to mind. The text says Jacob, he's anxious about seeing his brother Esau for the first time. All those years of betraying him and stealing his birthright and his blessing. And he's anxious to see him again. So sometimes there's relational anxiety. Or sometimes there's anxiety about the unknowns, about transition and the hardships. Following God into the unknowns. I just think about the Israelites, the Exodus story. Exodus through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. I mean, follow the journey of the people of God through the Bible and the transitions they experience, especially the Exodus story. So there's anxiety in the transition. Or sometimes there's anxiety in a sense of angst or anguish. I think about Jesus in the book of Luke 22, praying and talking about if the cup can pass before him. And it says, the text says he sweated drips of blood. There's such intense anguish, anxiety. Or fear. Jesus talking to Peter in John 21 says, Peter, one day your arms are going to be outstretched wide and you're going to be led places you don't want to go. There's anxiety in that. There's fear in that. And so if we look carefully at the Bible, anxiety is a part of our journey as Christians. It's a part of our journey of faith. And I'd like to challenge you and for us to think about that. On the one hand, we have anxiety. And on the other hand, we have anxiety transformed, anxiety as a catalyst for growth. And between that is the cross of Christ, is the resurrected Lord. And the resurrected Lord takes this anxiety and he transforms it into this resurrected new life, into this anxiety that we can use as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to draw closer to him. And our job as Christians, as people who come alongside in ministries and churches, is to help people reframe their anxiety and bring it from this must mean you're a bad Christian or you don't have enough faith, and to resurrect it into life-giving opportunity, life-giving growth. And so as Christians and as people, we have a couple different responses we can take to anxiety. I really like the work of Rollo May, especially in his book, The Meaning of Anxiety. And he says that The healthy person, the healthy individual, moves ahead despite the anxiety, despite the conflict, right? And they actualize freedom. The unhealthy person, instead of moving ahead, they shut down, they retrench, they get stuck, and they don't face the anxiety. So you and I have a couple different responses to anxiety. One is we can approach it in an unhealthy way, which is where we get stuck and we bury it. It turns to depression, and it turns to fear, and it turns to worry, and turns to stress. Or we can approach anxiety in a healthy way, into anxiety being transformed. And in that healthy approach, we have an opportunity to push through anxiety, to push through fears, and to face opportunities and to embrace new life, opportunities for us to grow. And so in terms of our spiritual growth, it can be a barrier or a catalyst. It can be a barrier if we approach it in an unhealthy way, if we respond to it in an unhealthy way. In an unhealthy way, it becomes a barrier in that people view it as God is punishing me, or I must be a bad Christian, or I must lack faith. And when people feel that way, they disconnect from community, and they shut down, they withdraw, and they isolate. And they avoid experiences and opportunities that could be life-giving in church, in community. It's unhealthy. It's a barrier. But if we take anxiety and approach it from a healthy way and see it as a catalyst for growth, it can breathe all kinds of new life. It can help people face their fears. It can help encourage people to face conflict and have resolution and grow through that. So for example, my wife and I, if we're in conflict, there's anxiety there. It's present. That anxiety tells me, though, that our relationship is something that is worth fighting for, that I care about it. And when that anxiety comes up, I can choose to be unhealthy and to see it as a barrier to her and I move away from her, I withdraw, and we become distant. Or I can say anxiety is an opportunity, as a catalyst for growth, and I can face that conflict, face that anxiety, and her and I can grow through that, and our marriage can grow. It can also encourage us to trust God in the unknowns by saying, God, I don't know what the next step of life looks like or the next stage. I just have to trust you. I'm going to walk in that anxiety. I'm going to sit in my anxiety. Ultimately, I just see anxiety as an opportunity to help us grow as Christians. Any contact with anxiety allows the opportunity of growth on the other side as we face it. And so let me leave you with some practical steps. And these are just ideas, jumping off points. The work for you is to take some of these jumping off points and to bring it home to your ministry or church and to contextualize it with the people you're working with and to make it real and practical for them. And so what are some practical steps for the church in ministering to people, especially those who are already in your congregation or ministry? One is, I would encourage you to have eyes open for those who are struggling with anxiety. It's just fostering a sense of awareness. If after this talk I tell you to go outside and to look for every red Volkswagen Beetle on the road, you'll notice red Volkswagen Beetles everywhere. So if I ask you to leave here today and to notice and to pay attention, to look for people who are anxious and struggle with anxiety in your ministries and congregation, you'll begin to notice them and to see them, where before you might not have noticed. So simply, I want to encourage you to have eyes wide open for that. Second, I want to encourage you to help people normalize their anxious feelings, to let them know it's okay to be anxious. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of our experience. It's okay. I'd encourage you to walk with people through their anxiousness and through their struggles. Not simply just give them a verse, though helpful for many, but to walk alongside of them. Giving a verse is the easy way out. Walking alongside of them as we recite Scripture is the more difficult journey. I'd encourage you to connect their story of anxiety to the biblical text. So, for example, I imagine a young adult who's wrestling with transitions in life and new career opportunities and new relationships and maybe moving perhaps. Maybe you would help them identify their story in the Exodus story of people being on the move and trusting God in the in-between spaces from one stage to the next. Help them find a home in the biblical text. Or you can help people reimagine or reframe their anxiety. That's you helping them see anxiety as a catalyst for growth and not as a barrier to their growth. And that takes work. Or maybe you can help people remove the shame that comes with anxiety. People who wrestle with anxiety already feel shameful enough. When I stutter, I feel ashamed and I want to go into hiding. Well, you could come alongside of them and help remove that shame from them and help them journey to new life, into wholeness? Or what about practical steps for reaching out to those who struggle with anxiety? They're very similar to ministering to those in your congregation or ministry, but a few things are different for me. One, maybe you could begin the process of educating people, pastors, staff, lay people, lay leaders, the congregation, about what anxiety looks like, how it manifests itself. Some practical tips of how to walk alongside of people who wrestle with anxiety. Education. Also, maybe you could be an advocate. You could be the one who speaks out, who fights against the stigma of anxiety. If you don't know, and you probably do already, there's such a stigma with anxiety that people don't talk about it. You could be the voice who gives life to it and speaks out, becomes an advocate. Or maybe you can create non-anxious or entry or participatory points in your church. You may not realize it, but there's probably a lot of things you do as a congregation, as a church, that provoke anxiety, and they become barriers for people getting involved. And so to think through how we do church and how we minister, and do we allow people who are anxious to have entry points into the church? Or you can allow people just to be anxious. Allow them to be themselves in their anxiety. Allow them just to kind of sit in it, and you just to walk alongside of them. Or you can encourage events and activities that maybe don't feed anxiety. Maybe every Christian doesn't have to get on stage and give a testimony. I've been in churches where a sign of your faith is to get in front of a large audience and to share your testimony. Imagine what that does to someone who struggles with anxiety. That may be an opportunity for growth, but right now maybe they don't need to get front. And so maybe you need to encourage activities that don't feed on anxiety. Or maybe you can create a support group, or just a group of people where they rally around and talk about being anxious and what that means to them as people and how that plays out in their faith. There's a lot of things you can do, and I want you to be creative and to think outside the box. And there's a lot of ways to reach me online, whether it's my website or blog or social media sites such as Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and LinkedIn. I'd love for you to contact me, maybe to send me an email if there's ways that I can come alongside of you, or we can have some opportunities to discuss about what's going on in your ministry, or if I can just be your resource. Let me know. I want to help you be that person, to be that advocate who helps those who struggle with anxiety. People have come along me in my journey and have reached out to me and have helped minister to me in my anxiety. It's because of them I'm able to sit before you here and to talk to you today, where before I don't think I could do that. Or maybe this book, The Anxious Christian, might be a resource for your own life if you wrestle with anxiety. Or maybe you know someone who wrestles with anxiety and you want to slip it into their hands so they can see that there's a tool out there. There's a new way for them to see anxiety, not as a thing, as a bad thing, or as an indicator of a lack of faith, but as a catalyst for their growth. That God is reaching out to them in their anxiety and drawing them closer. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today, and I hope that the work that you do in reaching out to those who are anxious is blessed and fruitful. Thank you very much, and have a great day.